What would you think if I told you that a man's deepest confrontation with love doesn't happen when he wins her, but when he loses her? At 2 a.m., in the dim hush between midnight and dawn, there is no armor left to wear. His mind, usually sharp with distractions, softens into the dangerous vulnerability of memory. And it's in that hour, the forbidden hour, when a man realizes she is truly gone, that the archetypal collapse begins. He will tell himself stories at first. Stories to soothe the ego, stories to protect the false self. She was too much. She was too complicated. I needed my space. But under the surface of these rationalizations lives something raw, a haunting awareness that he's not just losing her, he's losing the version of himself he pretended to be. Carl Jung warned of this moment, the hour when the anima, the feminine image within a man's unconscious, shifts from idealization to devastation. Most men project this anima onto the women they love, never realizing they are courting their own reflection. And when she leaves, whether through silence, distance, or final words, it rips a veil away from his psyche. What's left is not the woman herself. What's left is his shadow. At 2 a.m., the ego has no defense against the haunting grip of memory. Her laughter echoes differently now. Her absence has weight. Her silence is no longer a tactic to figure out, but an echo chamber forcing him into reflection. And here's the truth no one tells him. It's not her physical departure that stings. It's the mirror she accidentally held up to his unhealed wounds. The woman who leaves becomes an alchemist. Without even knowing it, she initiates a man into his own darkness. She presses on the scar tissue of his childhood attachments, the wounds of his mother, the gaps left by years of emotional avoidance. This is not just about love. It's about the shattering of projection. Some women trigger his ego. They make him feel powerful, desirable, in control. But the woman he thinks about at 2 a.m., the one he can't replace, is the woman who accidentally touched his soul. She revealed his cracks. She activated his shadow. And the male ego despises that. It resists humility. It hates spiritual initiation. It wants comfort, not growth. But love, especially when it is lost, does not offer comfort. It offers transformation. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt the gravitational pull of someone you walked away from, not because you still wanted them, but because they forced you to meet parts of yourself you weren't ready to see? If so, you've already stepped into the archetypal dance of longing and individuation. You've already tasted the bittersweet medicine Carl Jung spoke of when he described the confrontation between the persona and the shadow. For the man left in the silence, this is initiation disguised as heartbreak. It's the dark night of the soul wrapped in the skin of late-night loneliness. The woman's absence becomes a portal, a place where his old identity dies. But here's the paradox. Most men won't know how to process this. They'll chase substitutes. They'll scroll through distractions. They'll seek women who don't challenge them, who don't mirror the uncomfortable truths. Why? Because facing the truth feels like death. The Stoics understood this too. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but the imagination of a man at 2 a.m. is merciless. It replays every word he didn't say, every apology he withheld, every moment he chose pride over presence. And this is where the shift happens. At some point, if he's lucky, or perhaps unlucky enough to be spiritually awakened, he will stop blaming her. He will stop replaying the argument, the phone call, the silence. He will realize it wasn't just about her walking away. It was about him refusing to meet himself. You see, the woman he obsesses over in the late hours isn't just a woman. She's a symbol, a reflection of his unfinished inner work. She represents the depth he rejected, the softness he feared, the intimacy he couldn't sustain. And that's why he can't sleep, because the soul knows what the ego tries to forget. She was the lesson, and the lesson isn't finished. Most women do not realize the power they hold in the moment they walk away, not with cruelty, not with rage, but with quiet certainty. That is the kind of departure that follows a man into his sleep, the kind that becomes a ghost in his chest, long after the door has closed. At 2 a.m., under the cold fluorescent glow of a phone screen he doesn't dare to unlock, he replays not just the relationship, but the archetype she embodied. Carl Jung called it the anima confrontation. It's a spiritual crisis that looks, on the outside, like heartbreak. But in truth, it's a soul fracture. The woman he obsesses over at 2 a.m. is not just a woman. She is the living symbol of the feminine energy he denied within himself, the nurturer he rejected, the softness he feared, the vulnerability he disowned. She is no longer there to absorb his projections. So now, alone in the dark, he's forced to meet the shadows she left behind. And the first shadow is pride. Pride is the armor he wore in every conversation when she asked for his heart, but he gave her his defenses. Pride kept him from softness, from surrender. It told him to hold back when she reached for depth, to detach when she asked for presence. And now, in the silence, pride is useless. It becomes a prison instead of a shield. This is the first forbidden moment, when he realizes she's not punishing him by leaving. She's saving herself. For a man conditioned by ego and conquest, this is unthinkable. His ego tells him women wait, women come back, women forgive. But the woman he thinks about at 2 a.m. is not that woman. She is the woman who outgrew the role of emotional caretaker. She is the woman who walked away not to wound him, but to reclaim herself. And in doing so, she initiates his fall from the false masculine. Carl Jung wrote about this descent. He said the loss of the anima in a man's life can feel like madness because it dismantles his illusions of control. It forces him to meet his own feminine wounds, the mother wound, the abandonment trauma, the soft places he hardened over. Most men will try to avoid this confrontation. They'll drink, they'll distract, they'll text other women. But none of it will work because the lesson has already been planted. At 2 a.m., in the quiet collapse of his distractions, he is no longer in love with her as a person. He is in love with the parts of himself she revealed and then withdrew. And that's the second forbidden moment. Realizing he didn't just lose her, he lost the version of himself that existed in her reflection. This is where the obsession begins. Not because she was perfect, not because the relationship was flawless, but because she represents the feminine mirror, the archetypal symbol of his unfinished work. He remembers the look in her eyes when she saw through him. He remembers the words she whispered when he let his guard down. He remembers the way she held space for his softness and the way he rejected it out of fear. Now, alone in the night, those moments haunt him because they were sacred, and he treated them like ordinary things. What would you think if I told you this is where real transformation begins? When a man stops asking, "How do I get her back?" and starts asking, "What parts of myself did I abandon to lose her?" This is where ego death starts to happen. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating the shadow and embracing the wholeness of the self. It is not about getting her back. It is about becoming the man who no longer betrays his own soul in relationships. At 2 a.m., the man who cannot sleep is not grieving love lost. He is grieving the version of himself that love revealed, and his inability to hold on to it. Most women don't know this. They think his silence after the breakup is indifference. But in truth, it's often a silent reckoning. His ego won't allow him to reach out, but his soul won't allow him to let go. So he exists in between, haunted, awake, undone. There is a strange gravity in the space between silence and obsession. It pulls at a man's psyche like an undertow he cannot fight, dragging him deeper into the unresolved parts of himself. At 2 a.m., When the distractions are exhausted and the masks fall away, a man enters his own private, dark night of the soul. This is the third forbidden moment, the one Carl Jung hinted at, but few dare to name. It is the moment when he realizes it was never really about her. It was about the emotional exile he placed himself in long before he met her. Her departure simply revealed the cracks. She was, in many ways, a spiritual mirror. Her love reflected back to him the vulnerable boy beneath the armor, the part of him that longed to be seen but was too afraid to be exposed. And now that she's gone, he's left staring at his own reflection with no buffer, no distraction, no one to blame. This is the agony of a man confronting his anima in absence. He thought he wanted romance, passion, affection. But at 2 a.m., he realizes he craved something far more dangerous: integration. He wanted someone to soothe his mother wound without challenging his ego. He wanted someone to love him without forcing him to evolve. He wanted the comfort of her body but not the vulnerability of her gaze. And now, he's left with the echoes of every time he withdrew when she leaned in, the memory of every moment she offered depth, and he met it with detachment. Some men never recover from this realization. They spend years chasing replacements, new women, new distractions, new conquests. But the pattern repeats because the internal fracture remains. Until it's confronted, no relationship will satisfy him. He will oscillate between craving intimacy and fearing it, loving the woman and resenting her, desiring closeness and sabotaging it the moment it becomes real. At 2 a.m., when the weight of regret presses against his chest, he finally faces this truth. The woman he obsesses over is not the woman who left. She is the woman who awakened him. And that is why he cannot let her go. Carl Jung warned of this moment: the confrontation with the unconscious feminine, the anima, the soft mirror that exposes a man's disconnection from his own heart. It is a death of sorts, the death of the persona he has carefully constructed, the lover, the achiever, the emotionally unavailable man who thinks he is in control. In reality, she was never under his control. She was a free woman, a woman who refused to play the role of emotional caretaker to a man unwilling to meet himself. That is why she left. Not to punish him, not to manipulate him, but because she knew staying would require her to shrink, to self-abandon, to betray her own evolution. So she walked away, quietly, with dignity. And in doing so, she became the catalyst for his awakening. This is where the alchemy begins. Some women break a man's heart, but other women, women who embody feminine sovereignty, they break his pattern. They dismantle the loop he's trapped in: avoidance, control, projection, ego. They force him to confront the shadow he has buried beneath achievements, bravado, or emotional distance. And make no mistake, this confrontation is violent, not in the physical sense, but in the psychic sense. The man at 2 a.m. feels like he's unraveling because part of him is, the part that cannot love deeply, cannot connect vulnerably, cannot surrender without conditions. That part is dying. What would you think if I told you that she was not his downfall, but his teacher? The relationship wasn't a failure. It was an initiation into deeper manhood, into emotional maturity, into authentic connection beyond the shallow games of conquest. But not every man accepts the lesson. Some will run, some will numb, some will stay stuck in their loop, chasing the ghost of her in other women, but never finding her essence again, because it was never really about her. It was about the parts of himself she brought to light. And yet, for the man who is ready, 2 a.m. becomes sacred. It is the hour of reckoning, the hour when he stops asking, "Why did she leave?" and starts asking, "What parts of myself have I refused to love?" This is the moment the ego shatters and the soul begins. When a man finally reaches this place, This psychic edge where sleep evades him and his thoughts become sharp like glass. He encounters the most dangerous question of all. What if she never comes back, and I'm left to face myself forever? At 2 a.m., the fantasy of reconciliation begins to dissolve. The mind runs through imagined conversations, ghost texts never sent, moments replayed like sacred failures. But deep down, in the quiet marrow of his being, he knows, even if she returned, the wound wouldn't close, because the wound was never hers to heal. Carl Jung described this descent as enantiodromia, the turning of one thing into its opposite. A man who thought he was in control must now surrender. A man who believed love was about possession learns it is about reflection. And a man who sought comfort from a woman must now find courage within himself. This is the soul's midnight where identity unravels. The lover archetype dies here. Not the archetype of romance, but the distorted version of it. The man who loves to avoid loneliness. The man who clings to women to escape his own emptiness. That part cannot survive the dark night. It burns in the fires of solitude, leaving behind a raw, aching humility. He realizes he never really saw her, not truly. He saw his projections, his needs, his childhood longings wrapped around her body like invisible threads. And when she pulled away, those threads snapped, leaving him exposed. But this is not a tragedy. It is a metamorphosis. Some women are not sent to soothe a man's soul. They are sent to summon it, to wake him from the half-life of ego games and emotional avoidance, to rip open the quiet spaces where love and terror live side by side. Have you ever wondered why men sometimes remember a single woman for decades? It's because she wasn't just a person to him. She was an event, a psychic disruption, a spiritual earthquake that shook the foundation of who he thought he was. At 2 a.m., in the stillness of his regret, he recognizes this. She did not just walk away from him. She walked away from the role he wanted her to play. The role of mother, the role of emotional healer, the role of patient savior who would wait while he remained emotionally inert. But she wasn't built for that. She was a woman on her own path, a woman who had done her shadow work and refused to become a caretaker of a man's unclaimed inner child. She could hold space, yes, but she would not carry his burdens for him. This is what makes her unforgettable. Her silence after leaving does not just echo, it reverberates. It forces him to sit in his discomfort, to question his patterns, to see himself clearly without the veil of seduction or the distraction of drama. Some women are medicine, but not the kind you enjoy, the kind that burns going down and cleanses you from the inside out. And now, alone in the night, he feels the sting of that medicine. His pride has no refuge. His ego has no defense. His mind has no distraction. This is the sacred hour of self-confrontation, where a man must decide, will he rebuild the same walls and call it healing? Or will he break the pattern, step into the pain and meet his own soul? The truth is, not every man survives this process. Some will collapse into bitterness. Others will numb themselves with new conquests, new distractions, new forms of denial. But the few, the rare few, will rise from the ashes of their shattered ego. They will stop asking why she left and start asking why they hid from themselves for so long. They will understand finally that the woman who walked away was not the villain in their story. She was the oracle, the mirror, the catalyst. And in this way, her departure was not a rejection. It was an initiation. Because sometimes the greatest love a woman can offer a man is to walk away when he refuses to meet himself. In that moment, she chooses herself and forces him to choose, stay asleep or wake up. At 2 a.m., he begins to wake. There is a particular silence that follows a woman's final goodbye, a silence that does not scream, does not plead, does not even whisper. It simply exists, like a shadow in the corner of his mind that will not disappear. And it is in this silence where the real work begins. For centuries, men have been conditioned to conquer, to chase, to claim. But the woman who leaves without theatrics, who vanishes without collapse or begging, is the woman who rewrites his entire narrative of love. At 2 a.m., he is no longer thinking about how to win her back. He is staring at the hollow spaces inside himself, the places he has ignored, abandoned, or projected onto her. Carl Jung warned of this precise phenomenon. He called it anima projection, the psychological compulsion to assign the contents of a man's own soul onto the women he desires, to fall in love not with her, but with the reflection of his own unconscious feminine energy. And when she leaves, that reflection vanishes, and he is forced to meet his emptiness directly. This is why it hurts so much. This is why it feels like death, because part of him is dying, the false part. The part that thought he could bypass his own evolution by outsourcing it to romance. Now the mirror is gone, the distraction is gone, and what's left is himself. Some men spiral in this moment. They drown in the undertow of regret. They text too late. They call at odd hours. They try to bargain with fate. But fate does not negotiate. The woman who leaves and doesn't look back triggers a man's deepest initiation, the confrontation with his own unlived life. The nights he numbed himself with busyness. The times he ignored his inner voice to avoid discomfort. The countless ways he has used love as anesthesia rather than awakening. At 2 a.m., he realizes she is not coming back, not because she hates him, but because she loves herself. She has outgrown the role of emotional caretaker. She refuses to be the nursemaid of his wounds while he remains asleep to his own shadow. This is where the alchemy happens, because now, stripped of his illusions, he has a choice. Will he turn bitter, call her cold, and stay small? Or will he use this pain as a doorway to transformation? Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is exactly the kind of pain he meant. Not physical pain, but the death of false selves, the collapse of egoic fantasies. The man who understands this doesn't chase after her in desperation. He doesn't write 10-page messages trying to explain his feelings. He sits. He breathes. He stares into the abyss of his own making. And eventually, something shifts. In the depths of night, he remembers the moments he kept silent when he should have spoken. The times he withheld love out of fear. The games he played to maintain control. He sees how piece by piece he built a wall between himself and intimacy. And now he understands why she left. She refused to climb over it. There's a peculiar kind of freedom that comes with this level of awareness. Yes, it burns. Yes, it shakes his foundation. But it also unlocks a door he didn't know existed. The door to his own soul. For the first time, he starts to ask different questions. Not, why did she leave? But why did I abandon myself long before she ever walked away? Not, how do I get her back? But how do I return to myself? This is the true dark night of the soul. Not a punishment, but a purification. A chance to become the kind of man who no longer fears love or uses it to avoid his own reflection. At 2 a.m., with the weight of absence pressing against his chest, he understands. She didn't just leave his life, she left his illusions. And in doing so, she gave him the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to break the cycle, to stop chasing women as a way to escape himself, to meet his own inner feminine, to reclaim the parts of himself he projected onto her. This is the moment when the wound becomes the portal. And though she may never return, the man who chooses to grow in her absence will never forget the woman who forced him to finally meet his soul. There is something sacred about the silence of 2 a.m., the hour when no distractions remain and the mind can no longer outrun the truth. For the man who realizes she's not coming back, This hour is both a punishment and a purification. It is where his ego meets the mirror of his own emptiness. Most men fear this moment because they have never been taught how to hold pain without projecting it onto someone else. Society teaches him to suppress it, numb it, or distract himself with conquest. But in the raw darkness of that sleepless hour, when the phone stays silent and no text arrives, there is nowhere left to run. He remembers her, her silence, her stillness, her refusal to negotiate with his avoidance. She did not beg. She did not explain herself into exhaustion. She simply chose herself over the cycle. And in that decision, she triggered something ancient in him, the primal ache of separation, not just from her, but from his own unintegrated soul. Carl Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. It is the part of him that he has buried for years, the part that longs for love, yet recoils from vulnerability. The part that says, "Come closer," but builds walls the moment intimacy becomes real. And now, in the hollow space she left behind, he feels the gravity of his own contradictions. He remembers the small moments, the times he dismissed her emotions as too much, the nights he chose withdrawal over connection, the subtle ways he made her feel like she had to earn his attention. He did not realize then that she wasn't asking for more effort. She was asking for his soul to show up, unmasked, unguarded, real. But most men don't know how to give that, because no one ever showed them. At 2 a.m., he realizes that love is not a game of possession. It is not about keeping someone close out of fear of loneliness. It is about meeting another person with the raw honesty of your own inner life. And he never did that, not fully. He wanted her body, her presence, her affection, but he was afraid to give her access to the dark corridors of his own heart. This is the moment where obsession is born, not because he wants her back, but because he wants back the version of himself he thought he was with her. She made him feel alive. She made him feel seen. But the truth is, she wasn't filling his soul. She was reflecting it back to him. When she left, the mirror shattered, and now he must pick up the pieces. There is a particular cruelty to this kind of awakening. It does not happen gently. It arrives in waves of regret, in flashes of memory, in silent drives through empty streets at night. It is the realization that she left not because she stopped loving him, but because she loved herself more than she loved his potential. This is where the Stoics and Jungian psychology meet. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And that is exactly what he did. He wasted time withholding love, thinking there would always be another chance, another day, another opportunity to open up. But life is not generous in this way. At 2 a.m., he understands. Time does not negotiate with avoidance. Now, alone in the quiet, he sees that love was never about fixing someone else or finding the perfect partner to soothe his wounds. Love is about standing naked in front of your own shadow, holding its gaze, and integrating the parts of yourself you've denied. The woman who left forced him into this reckoning, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. She could not carry the weight of his inner child, his mother wounds, his fear of rejection. She could not be both lover and therapist, both goddess and bandage. And so she chose to disappear, not because she wanted to cause him pain, but because she refused to abandon herself any longer. Now the work belongs to him. Will he become bitter, calling all women manipulative for setting boundaries? Or will he recognize this as his initiation into true manhood, the kind of manhood that does not depend on control or performance, but on the courage to feel fully? This is the secret most men never learn. Real love will break you before it heals you. It will strip away the masks, the bravado, the ego-driven games. It will burn through the parts of you that are still sleeping. At 2 a.m., when she is truly gone, he is left with the ashes of his old self. And in those ashes lies the possibility of something new, a man reborn from loss, no longer running from his own reflection. But that is his choice now. Some men will fall back asleep, chasing the next distraction. Others will stay awake and become something rare. Most men never imagine that love can become a mirror so sharp it cuts them open. At 2 a.m., when silence stretches longer than his pride can bear, he realizes something primal. She was not just a woman to him. She was a symbol, an archetype, not merely a romantic partner, but an invitation into something deeper. And that's why her absence haunts him more than her presence ever did. Carl Jung would say this is the moment when the anima, the feminine image in a man's unconscious, comes to life. The woman he lost is no longer just a memory of dinners, smiles, or shared mornings. She becomes the embodiment of every soft, tender part of his soul he tried to suppress. Her silence stings not because she left, but because she represents the parts of himself he abandoned long before she did. At 2 a.m., the truth dawns on him like an unwelcome ghost. He was never really afraid of losing her. He was afraid of confronting his own emptiness without her. He was afraid of the spiritual poverty that surfaces when the illusion of control dissolves. This is the forbidden terrain of male psychology, the place most men refuse to explore because it threatens everything they were taught about love, power, and identity. For decades, he has been conditioned to view love as conquest, to pursue affection like a prize, to think of women as orbiting satellites to his ego's gravitational pull. But when a woman detaches with true spiritual detachment, not with malice, but with quiet dignity, she unhooks herself from that orbit. She steps out of his gravitational field, and suddenly, he floats alone in space, disoriented, weightless, gasping for meaning. This is not heartbreak, this is ego death. In that moment, he cannot help but scroll through old texts, replay old conversations, analyzing every small mistake like a detective searching for clues. But deep down, he knows it's not about what was said or unsaid. It's about the energetic transaction that took place beneath the surface. She mirrored his unresolved wounds back to him. And now she's gone, leaving him face to face with the rawness of his own shadow. The Stoics warned of this moment too, though in different language. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most men discover this wisdom too late. When they had her love, they mistook it for a guarantee. When they lost it, they realized it was a mirror, and now the mirror is shattered. At 2 a.m., he remembers the woman who once lay next to him, breathing softly, eyes closed, but soul awake. He remembers the way she held silence, not as a punishment, but as a boundary. She was trying to invite him into depth, into presence, into awareness. But he met her silence with withdrawal instead of curiosity. He mistook her softness for submission. He confused her patience with permission to neglect the emotional intimacy she craved. So she left, and now, in the darkness, he understands something forbidden, that love is not about possession. Love is a ritual of surrender. A man cannot fully love a woman until he is willing to lose the parts of himself that were never real to begin with. The performer, the seducer, the controller. At 2 a.m., she becomes his ghost goddess, the figure he chases in dreams but cannot reach in waking life. She represents not just the woman who left, but the woman inside his unconscious, the anima who demands integration. This is not romantic longing, this is soul longing. And that is why it hurts so much. His friends may tell him to move on, find someone new, play the game again. But his deeper self knows better. This is not about finding a replacement. It's about facing the wound that opened when she walked away. The wound that was always there, hidden beneath bravado, beneath distraction, beneath a lifetime of emotional sleepwalking. Some men will medicate this wound with numbing, alcohol, women, work, denial. But the rare man will stay in the ache. He will let it burn through him. He will sit in the dark night of his soul and ask, "Who was I pretending to be? And who must I become now?" This is the alchemy of heartbreak, not the soft sadness of romance novels, but the brutal transformation of identity. When she's gone for good, he can no longer hide behind performance. He must become real, or remain trapped in the loops of avoidance forever. This is the secret women rarely realize. Sometimes leaving a man is not about punishment. It is about forcing him to meet his soul for the first time. And at 2 a.m., when the bed is cold and the mind is loud, he finally understands. At this hour, between midnight and dawn, the mind opens doors it locks tightly during the day. He lies there, staring at the ceiling, tracing patterns of regret. His body is still, but inside, there is war. His thoughts loop like shadows pacing the edges of his consciousness. This is not about her physical absence anymore. It's about the rupture she created in his identity. Carl Jung called it the crucifixion of the ego. When a man's armor is stripped away, not by force, but by the soft yet unyielding withdrawal of a woman who no longer plays into his defenses, he is left bare. And there is nothing more terrifying for a man than emotional nakedness. You see, some women trigger a man's desire, but others, rare ones, trigger his awakening. And this is far more dangerous. When a woman quietly exits his life, leaving no drama, no blame, just silence, she creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, his false self suffocates. At 2 a.m., he realizes, the version of himself that needed her validation is not sustainable. He remembers the times he dismissed her intuition, rolled his eyes at her boundaries, minimized her emotions as too much. He remembers how he guarded his own vulnerability like a fortress, never allowing her in beyond the surface level. He maintained the illusion of control because his ego demanded it. But now that she is gone, he understands. She was never trying to control him. She was trying to free him from his own emotional prison, and he chose the bars over the door. This is the paradox. The man who thinks he is losing freedom by opening up doesn't realize he is enslaving himself by staying closed. At 2 a.m., the echoes of her words return, not the literal conversations, but the energy beneath them. The moments she asked for connection, not out of neediness, but from a place of deep feminine knowing. The moments she craved his presence, not his performance, and he ignored it. Now he understands the cost. Jung believed that the anima is not merely a projection of romantic fantasy. It is the bridge between a man's conscious mind and his soul. When a woman holds space for his depth, she activates that bridge. But if he refuses the invitation, if he stays in the shallow waters of ego, she will withdraw, not because she stopped loving him, but because she cannot stay where her own soul is being neglected. This is what no one tells you. Love is not lost in one dramatic moment. It dissolves slowly in the quiet spaces where one person turns away from growth and the other refuses to abandon herself. At 2 a.m., he remembers the first time he felt her slipping away. He brushed it off. He thought she was bluffing. He thought he could fix it later. But there is no later when a woman detaches from within. When she no longer asks for more, it's because she has decided to give herself what he could not. And so she left, not out of cruelty, but out of spiritual necessity. Now he is left to sit with the fragments of his ego, the part of him that believed he was in control, the part of him that thought love was about possession, not reflection. This is where the true dark night begins. He turns over in bed, but sleep will not come. Because the soul does not sleep when it is being dismantled. He thinks about calling her, about sending a text, about one last attempt to regain the illusion of closeness. But something deeper stops him. A voice, not hers, but his own higher consciousness whispers, "This is not about her. This is about you." This is about the man he became in her absence. You see, when a man reaches this level of loss, he is at a crossroads. He can choose bitterness, blame, distraction, or he can choose transformation. Most men will choose the former because it's easier, but the few, the rare, awakened few, will let the pain rip through them like wildfire, burning away every mask they ever wore. They will step into the ashes of who they were, asking, "What version of me allowed this to happen?" And in that question, there is power. Because the man who truly transforms after loss doesn't just become better, he becomes real. At 2 a.m., he realizes this is not about getting her back. This is about becoming the kind of man who never loses himself again. The woman he lost, she was the catalyst, but the man he is becoming, that is the real reward. There's something unspoken that happens to a man in these moments. The moments between midnight and dawn, when the noise of the world has faded and there is no one left to perform for. He remembers the moments he withdrew first, the times he distanced himself, not because he wanted space, but because he feared intimacy. The times he chose silence over honesty, defensiveness over vulnerability. And now, alone with his thoughts, he recognizes the pattern. Carl Jung described this as the shadow confrontation. It's when a man meets the parts of himself he spent his life avoiding, the parts he projected onto her, the insecurities, the wounds, the unhealed childhood echoes. At 2 a.m., he can no longer blame her for his restlessness. He can no longer claim she was too emotional or too intense. He realizes she simply mirrored back the truth he refused to face. Some women are mirrors, and the reflection is not always pretty. When a man meets a woman who reflects his soul rather than feeds his ego, he often runs. Not because he does not love her, but because loving her demands a level of self-honesty he has not yet mastered. She holds up the lantern, and he sees the cracks in his foundation, the fragile masculinity, the walls of control, the wounds of abandonment buried beneath bravado. At 2 a.m., he no longer has the luxury of denial. He sees it clearly now. She was never the enemy. She was the gatekeeper of his next evolution. But he chose to retreat. He disappeared emotionally, perhaps even physically, thinking distance would protect him. Thinking avoidance would keep the ego safe. What he did not understand is that his vanishing act was not an escape. It was an initiation. And now, in the cold silence of the early morning, he faces the consequence of that choice. He remembers the look in her eyes. The last time she truly saw him before she stopped trying. It wasn't anger. It was sadness. A knowing sadness that happens when a woman realizes she cannot carry a man across the threshold of his own awakening. She can knock on the door, but she cannot open it for him. And so, she left. Not out of cruelty, but because she loved herself enough to walk away. Now he is left with the phantom of her energy, the space where her warmth used to be, the absence of her curiosity about his day, the silence where her emotional invitation once lived. He scrolls through old messages, replays old moments, but he knows this is not about nostalgia. This is about reckoning. Jung warned that the soul does not evolve through comfort. It evolves through confrontation with the shadow. And here he is, at 2 a.m., face to face with the truth. He pushed away the woman who held the blueprint to his healing, not because she was wrong for him, but because he was unprepared to meet himself. It's not that he wanted her to leave. It's that part of him believed he was unworthy of her presence. This is the tragedy of the unintegrated man. He thinks he is protecting himself from heartbreak, but what he is really doing is choosing slow spiritual death over rebirth. And now, he sits in the dark night of his own making. He feels the ache in his chest, the kind of ache that no distraction can numb. He could text someone new. He could pour another drink. He could scroll through social media until his eyes blur. But none of it touches the core wound that has finally surfaced. This is what no one tells you about masculine heartbreak. It is not just about missing a woman. It is about confronting the boy inside who never learned how to love without conditions. At 2 a.m., the bravado crumbles. The armor falls away. He is left with his raw humanity, and this is where the alchemy begins. Some men will shut this door quickly. They will blame her, call her names, tell themselves stories about how she was too much. They will run back into the familiar arms of distraction, ego, and shallow validation. But the rare man, the man who chooses growth over comfort, will stay in this darkness a little longer. He will feel it fully. He will let it break him open, not apart. And in that breaking, something sacred happens. He becomes accountable to himself. He stops asking why she left and starts asking why he built walls instead of bridges. This is the forbidden knowledge most men never learn. That the end of a relationship is not the end of love. It is the beginning of deeper self-love. The kind that doesn't beg for someone to come back, but instead asks, how do I become whole so I never betray myself again? At 2 a.m., he starts to understand. It was never about her leaving. It was about who he is willing to become now that she's gone. The clock keeps ticking, but at 2:30 a.m., time no longer feels linear. It feels symbolic. Every second is a confrontation with regret, and not the shallow kind of regret, the performative "I miss you" texts, or the recycled apologies whispered too late. This is the deep regret, the kind that burns in the gut, the kind Carl Jung described as shadow sorrow, the pain of realizing you abandoned parts of yourself in the name of pride, only to discover that the real cost was love. This is when a man understands something forbidden by most masculine narratives, that obsession is not always about desire. Sometimes it's about unfinished inner work. When a woman like her leaves, when she finally stops answering, when she stops checking in, when she stops caring if he comes back, he doesn't just lose a relationship. He loses the mirror that showed him the truth of his own emotional limitations. And yet the male ego is cunning. It tells him stories to protect his pride. It whispers lies in the dead of night. She'll be back. She needs me more than I need her. No woman can stay away from me forever. But underneath that fragile performance is a deeper knowing. He feels it in his chest, in the quiet panic that rises when the phone stays silent for days, weeks, months. She is not coming back. And that realization splits him into two versions of himself. One version wants to escape the pain, to numb it, bury it, distract from it, to find another woman to occupy the same emotional space without having to do any of the work. This is the boy inside, the boy who fears discomfort, the boy who chases instant gratification over long-term transformation. But the other version, the version who stares into the abyss at 2:45 a.m., knows this is a spiritual crisis, not a dating crisis, not a text-back game, a crisis of selfhood. This is the moment when a man has to decide, will he choose avoidance or awakening? Jung warned about these crossroads, the choice between staying asleep in the ego or waking up to the soul's deeper call. And for many men, it takes a loss like this, an intimate, soul-triggering loss, to finally meet that moment. Because some women do not just leave quietly, they leave karmically. They leave in a way that shakes his foundation, forcing him to question who he has been and why he keeps sabotaging intimacy. At 3 a.m., the shadows on the ceiling start to move. He thinks about the nights he left her waiting for answers, the texts he didn't send, the calls he ignored because he thought attention was power. He thought silence was control. But now the silence belongs to her, and he realizes something. True feminine detachment is not anger. It's indifference. It's not the woman who cries and begs him to stay. It's the woman who disappears into her own rebirth and never looks back. This is why some men obsess after the ending. Not because they can't find someone else to date, but because they can't unfeel the imprint of a woman who saw them fully and loved them anyway, until she didn't. At 3:15 a.m., he understands the true cost of emotional withholding. It wasn't about playing it cool or keeping control. It was about rejecting his own vulnerability to the point of collapse. And now the collapse has come. But here's where the alchemy starts. If he allows it, this heartbreak can become the beginning of his individuation, the sacred Jungian process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not dominant, whole. To become whole, a man must integrate the parts of himself he exiled. The part that longs for softness, but is terrified of surrender. The part that craves love, but fears dependency. The part that wants to be seen, but trembles at the thought of being truly known. At 3:30 a.m., he knows. This is not just about her absence. It's about the absence of his own emotional courage. And this is why some men wake up the next day and do everything in their power to forget. They run back to surface-level connections. They flood their calendars with distractions. They tell themselves she was just another woman. But the rare man, the man willing to evolve, sits in this discomfort. He lets it burn. He lets it strip away the false self until only the truth remains. And the truth is this: no man truly fears losing a woman. What he fears is losing the illusion of control. Because when the woman who touched his soul walks away, she takes his ego with her. And what's left? Himself, raw, unmasked, vulnerable. This is not punishment, it is initiation. At 3:45 a.m., he has a choice. Rebuild the walls and pretend nothing happened, or step into the unknown, into the terrifying but sacred work of becoming a man who no longer hides from love. The clock strikes 4 a.m. Somewhere in the darkness, he breathes in the silence. And for the first time, he doesn't run from it. By 4 a.m., a man learns something most never dare to admit aloud. Silence can be louder than rage, and absence can wound more than betrayal. The woman who disappears without begging for closure becomes a paradox in his mind. She is gone, yet everywhere. Her silence becomes an echo chamber for his shadows. This is the forbidden truth Carl Jung spoke of, but few men face willingly. When a woman triggers his unconscious wound, it is not about her. It is about the parts of himself he never healed. And at 4 a.m., those parts are no longer content to hide. He lies awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he ended up here, not in the literal sense, but in the existential one. How did he become the man who pushed her away only to crave her return? How did he become the man who weaponized detachment, only to be destroyed by it when she finally mastered the game better than he did? This is where the dark night of the soul begins, not with death, but with the slow erosion of the false self. Jung called this process enantiodromia, the moment when a pattern pushed to its extreme transforms into its opposite. The man who once used silence as a shield now drowns in his own quiet. The one who withheld affection now aches for connection. The one who feared vulnerability now sits naked before the mirror of his own soul, exposed and trembling. It is at this hour that men realize something they often deny. They do not actually want a woman who strokes their ego. They want a woman who forces them to meet their soul, but they usually don't realize this until she's gone. The boy inside him wanted to be adored without responsibility. The man he is becoming wants to be challenged into emotional maturity, but that path terrifies him because it means facing every flaw he has avoided since childhood. At 4:30 a.m., he replays conversations in his mind. Moments he dismissed, gestures he overlooked, truths he avoided because they were too raw. He remembers the softness in her voice when she asked him to open up, and the coldness in his tone when he refused. He thought he was protecting himself. What he was really doing was setting the stage for his own emotional exile. And now he sits in the aftermath. This is why men often mistake regret for longing. He might tell himself he misses her beauty, her body, her warmth. But beneath that surface-level nostalgia is something deeper. He misses the part of himself that only came alive in her presence. The vulnerable part, the part unafraid to be human instead of a performer in the social game. At 5 a.m., he starts to understand. This pain is not just about losing her. It is about losing the reflection of his higher self she once held up for him to see. Some women have that effect. They are not just lovers, they are mirrors. Mirrors that reveal both light and shadow. Mirrors that make a man question the stories he's been telling himself for years. I'm fine alone. I don't need anyone. I can't trust women. But now those mantras sound hollow in the quiet of early morning, because she left, not with drama, not with ultimatums, but with sacred silence. And that silence became his teacher. Jung warned that the feminine archetype, when repressed or projected, becomes dangerous. Not because she punishes, but because she awakens. She shows a man where he is half alive, half awake, half formed. At 5:30 a.m., a man realizes she is not coming back to rescue him from this emptiness. That was never her role. Her role was to trigger this initiation, and she did. Now he has two options. He can continue chasing surface-level distractions, trying to replace her with another body, another night, another temporary high, or he can finally face himself. He can descend into his own underworld, confront his shadows, and begin the sacred work of becoming whole. Wholeness is not comfort. It is confrontation. It is the willingness to see every crack in the mask, every false persona, every manipulative pattern disguised as strength. And if he is brave enough to walk that path, something shifts. He stops asking, "Why did she leave me?" and starts asking, "Why was I so terrified of being real with her?" That question is the key, because the man who can answer it, the man who can face his own reflection at dawn without flinching, will no longer be ruled by ego games. He will no longer chase women to validate his worth, nor fear their silence as a punishment. He will know his own value, and in knowing it, he will choose connection over control. By 6 a.m., the sky starts to lighten, and so does he. This is the alchemy of loss, the transformation of obsession into awakening, of heartbreak into individuation. He still misses her, yes, but now he misses her from a place of reverence, not possession. Because he knows the woman who triggered his soul wasn't meant to stay. She was meant to wake him up. And sometimes that is love in its highest form. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.